Welcome back to the Game Dev Show. This week I'm delighted to have with me Alicia Thayer, Senior Technical Designer at Crystal Dynamics. Alicia's worked on many AAA titles from the Lara Croft's reboot in 2012 to Red Dead and Max Payne. Welcome, Alicia. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. How was that intro? Was that okay
That was
for
great.
you?
Yeah.
Great, fantastic. I'd like to check that it aligns. Nothing worse than introducing someone and they're like, actually, no. But yeah, how you doing? How's everything going at Crystal
It's
Dynamics?
it's actually it's going really well. I am transitioning right now from being a kind of like an individual contributor to a more leadership position. So that's been a pretty exciting and pretty different thing for me. I now have a team of 6 people, something like that, that I've been with for the past handful of months. I'm really liking the new job a lot. It's challenging in its own ways, and I do miss being with the content all the time. But yeah,
Mm,
it's been fun.
the cost of success
It
is
is.
normally always giving up the thing you love and the reason you
Yeah.
got into games. You have a much bigger impact as an individual on the projects that you work on now.
Yeah, I do actually, and it's a different sort of impact. Now I joke that on most days I feel like kind of a switchboard operator, you know, just trying to get people to talk to each other, making sure that that what we're working on is being done in the right order and the right priority, making sure that our relationships with our sister teams, our sister disciplines, we're communicating well to them and making sure that they know what we need from them and when and all of that stuff. It's kind of just making sure that the machine keeps moving and moves
Mm,
smoothly, right? And that everyone on my team, the people that I have the closest contact with are happy with what they're doing
yeah.
and supported. As someone who enjoys and takes a lot of joy out of the support role kind of stuff, making sure that my team is happy, it's a very satisfying job. It's just different.
Yeah, because you studied computer science at California University. And did you imagine that this is where you'd be now, like, basically heading up a team at Crystal Dynamics at this point?
Backing way up, I decided I wanted to work in games when I was like 12 or something like that. Like I had this,
Okay.
I remember this moment. I had this pivotal moment where I realized that, like, oh my God, people make video games and I could be one of those people. And I grew up in Chico, California, which is like in Northern California. It's very rural, it's in a valley, right? And so no connection to the game industry whatsoever. I made this decision and went like, okay, cool. I have no idea how, you know? So I actually ended up staying in my hometown for my bachelor's and master's degrees, just because there happened to be a program that was getting started that was kind of exactly what I wanted. I didn't have a ton of
Mm,
money, so I was able to stay home and live at home while I was going to school. So that was pretty great. No, I did not think I was going to end up here at all. I knew I wanted to be in the industry. I didn't know where I wanted to end up, right? I started with, it's a kid. So you're just like, I don't know, animation, And as I got older,
mm,
and I was going to school, I had kind of a communication design and computer science, animation-y background through my program. Even then, as I was approaching graduation, I was still like, I don't quite know where I fit because I don't know anyone who works in the industry. you know, I thought production for a while. Like I thought maybe a producer role would be appropriate for me. And I got that idea from actually one of the guys that used to head up the volunteer program for GDC. He kind of took
mm.
me aside one day, asked me what I wanted to do, you know,
Yeah.
and I said, I have no idea, but here's what I can do. And he said, I think you'd be a really great producer. So I ended up using that as a lens with which to focus the end of my studies and actually start applying for jobs and things like that. I
Worked
had
out.
hoped to end up here, but
Yeah.
yeah, and certainly the way I ended up here, which I'm sure we'll cover a little bit later, not at all what I expected at all.
Really?
No,
Really?
no, certainly not.
Oh,
Right?
God, I can't wait. I can't wait. Yeah, I think that's the thing. Like sometimes it's just a bit of luck, right? Like where you
Yeah,
start being in the right place at the right time,
right
like,
place, right
being
time.
able to study, staying at home, but also like, the GDC Connect and then actually being like, this is what I should focus on.
When I trace my career, like these little pivotal moments, I'm sure everyone does this, but I look at it and go like, oh my God, if I had not made this decision to, like, it took me forever to go to GDC because I was ashamed of what I didn't know and I was afraid, right? So
Oh,
like undergrad, I could have been going to GDC as a volunteer and I never did. It took me until grad school to be like, God, I should just go, like I should just go. That is where I started making a few connections, having these really
mm,
pivotal conversations, where it's like, hey, think about this kind of stuff instead. Visiting even the career pavilion and just talking to people who were
mm.
hiring, even when I wasn't looking for a job, like that kind of stuff just all started to point me in the right direction. So I at least knew where to look, you know?
Yeah, but you've got to take the initiative, right? Like that's the thing. I think, and also I completely get that like human element, not wanting to appear to know less than you do, because you don't want it to be that people are like, oh, this person doesn't know anything. Well, they're never going to work in the industry, right? Like this just isn't right for you. And I think it's great that you just took those first steps because I think it can just be very challenging. I was going to ask you as well, actually, because talking of like traveling and going to places, whilst you were at California Uni, you actually did an exchange program when you went to Nagoya
I did.
for 6 months. What as an exchange student, what was that like?
So that's a funny story too. When I got to grad school, I realized that like if I wanted to study abroad, this was kind of my last chance. I was about to be like done with school. So I took a ton of French in high school, actually, and I like about 4.5 years of French, something like that. But I was taking Japanese at the time in grad school just for funsies. And so was my boyfriend at the time. And we both were like, you know what, let's go study abroad. Let's go do this thing. So we picked Japan. The program that we could get into was a little bit aggressive in terms of like linguistic requirement. And looking back on it, I think they fudged it a little bit, right? Because like my Japanese was not that great. Like, I could sight read, hiragana and katakana pretty well. My kanji was really weak. And my conversational skills, I'd say, was like borderline survival, somewhere in there. This program was pretty crazy. Like they wanted you to live they had this exchange student building that was mostly Chinese and Korean exchange students and like a tiny little handful, like 3, kids from America, something like that. So like you weren't going to be speaking English at all. We got off the plane, we got our orientation. I signed a lease like in Japanese, right? And they gave us a map again in Japanese and we're like, okay, cool. Like here's all the stuff that you need to know about your neighborhood. Anyway, peace, bye. Right. So like we get dropped off and my poor boyfriend and I are like, can you read this? And I'm like, no, can you? Nope. Okay. So we're up in our room. They've outfitted the room with, just a pillow and a comforter. And we're like, right, we have to go get food. Okay. And like toilet paper. We had to get toilet paper too. We didn't have any toilet paper. So we basically just kind of picked a direction to walk. We lived up pretty high. We were on like the 6th floor of a building, 6th or 7th floor of a building. And we look out. I remember looking out and being like, that looks like a store. So like, we literally just start walking in a direction, hoping to find food and toilet paper, and that was kind of the start of my trip. And that's kind of how it went, it was jumping into the absolute deep end of living in a foreign country. It's what I wanted. Like I wanted to go somewhere where I could feel what I used to say to myself is I want to go somewhere where I feel like a minority, right? A true minority, to see what that was like. And I got that in spades in Nagoya. Nagoya, even though it's the 4th largest city in Japan, where I was staying there were hardly any foreigners at all. English was not spoken routinely. English was on some signs, which was helpful, right? But by and large, it was like, get good and get good fast,
And did you?
You know what? I got pretty good. Like, I wouldn't say that I was fluent, but by the time I had left, I had gotten very comfortable with my neighborhood, very comfortable with grocery shopping, kind of all the day-to-day stuff. And in fact, I had gotten to a place where I really did want to practice my linguistic skills with other people. The way I look got in the way a lot because I look so foreign, right? I am so white. For people who can't see me, I know this is a podcast. Like, I have red hair, I have green eyes, I am very pale, I look very much of European descent. For example, I remember being at an open air market, right? And I was just ordering a coffee. Like, I just wanted to go get a coffee, right? And so I'm at this window with this guy and he looks at me, his eyes bulge, right? They get really, really big. And he's just like, nope. And he goes running the other direction saying English, English, English in Japanese, right? Like to his coworkers of like, I can't speak English. I can't speak English. Someone come up to the window, like, please help me. Please help me. I can't take an order from this woman, And I'm like, no, wait, I can do this. I can do this.
Please come back. Oh no, that's great.
So it was a really fun trip. I did some other hard mode things that are pretty crazy. Like, I took most of my coursework in Japanese. I took a Japanese calligraphy class from a guy that I think legit did not speak any English at all. It was just kind of like catch on as much as you want. The only class that I took that I think was bilingual was a Japanese history class, and the teacher was amazing. He was kind enough to do the lecture in Japanese and then in English. So he would do a chunk in Japanese, a chunk in English, and he'd move on, which was, that was quite exceptional.
Do you still practice it now?
Oh my gosh, I wish I had time. No, I don't. French or Japanese. I practice neither, and I feel like a jerk for it. It's in there somewhere, right? But it's unfortunately rotting.
Well, I think that's great. I think it's great that you had, like you did GDC and going to Nagoya like that in that context, you're right.
I'm glad I did it when I did. Yeah, it was really cool.
Like, I think I would have just collapsed. I don't know.
You know what? Okay, I'll be completely honest with you. Like that trip was amazing. I do not regret going. I wish I could go back and do it again. But there were a lot of tears too, right? It was still very hard. It was very stressful. It felt very isolating. My communication skills were infantile, you know? And so if you imagine spending 6 months in a culture where that's it, that's the extent to which you can communicate, unless you find the right person who can share in English with you instead of in Japanese or in Korean or what have you, right? I had a really good friend that I made over there who was Korean, and she preferred to speak in Japanese because she was stronger in Japanese than she was in English. I chose to speak in English because I was stronger in English and Japanese. And so we'd have bilingual conversations like on the train. It just meant that like everything was hard. Going to the store was hard. Using the train was hard. Even talking to your friends was hard. So everything takes that extra effort. So by the end of the day, you're just flattened, right?
I can imagine things are okay, I guess, if they're predictable and you know what's going to happen. But I imagine if something went wrong, then you're like, oh God, yeah, like I have to, like, I don't know, just for example, say you have a leak or a flood or you need to like call out a plumber. I can imagine situations like that, which are a bit off the beaten path. Then all of a sudden they become 3-4 times as stressful because you're trying to explain something which is quite important, but it's completely outside of what you've learned.
And still, no matter what you do, you always do it wrong because you're just in a culture that's different from your own, you know?
Yeah.
So like your instincts are just incorrect. The plumber thing's interesting. I don't remember. I think we did have a toilet that clogged because we had asked to borrow a plunger. And so we went to return it. We had cleaned it and everything like that, right? And so we return it all clean, all that good stuff. We put it on the desk and go like, here's your plunger. And the look on their face, like they just turn white as a sheet, right? And they're just mortified, just like, oh my God, get that thing off our desk, you know? Or just like, God, we can't do anything right, you know?
Oh,
I'm so
no.
sorry. I'm so sorry.
Oh no, yeah. From uni, your first role was actually at Rockstar.
That's right. Rockstar San Diego.
How did that come about?
About 6 months before I graduated from college, and this is my grad program, right? I was like, oh God, I should really start looking for jobs, you know? And again, remember, I was looking for both design and production, just trying to find some entry-level position, right? I must have applied to, I'm going to guess, over 100 places over the course of 6 months. And I've heard a lot of people with this exact same story of like, yeah, I applied everywhere. I never heard back from anywhere. I heard back from 2 companies through that entire experience. One was High Voltage Software, and that interview exploded. That was not a good interview. It was a phone interview, and it hit this really awkward moment. So when I was working in my grad program, right, and I was completing my coursework, I was also teaching, and I had taken over the lab components of like intro to game design and like a couple of other classes, right? So I was teaching intro to game design to a bunch of like freshman kids, you know, and the guy that was interviewing me at High Voltage really took issue with that and really drilled me about if I really felt like I was qualified enough to teach game design, having never done it professionally. And man, as a, you know, an early 20 something, you know, like just trying to get an entry position, I was like, I don't know how to answer this question.
How do you respond to that? Like, what do you say?
What do you say? So it's just kind of one of those things where you're like, I just don't think this is going super well.
Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for your time. Yeah. And to be fair, I was being interviewed for a level design position, and I will say right now that I am not a level designer. I know that for a fact now. I did not know that at the time. I know that for a fact now. Like spatial design is just not my jam. I'm much more a systems person. The other people I heard from was Rockstar, and what I never told Rockstar, and what I do tell only a few people, I'm more comfortable with it now because it's been, you know, well over a decade, is that I kind of forgot I applied to Rockstar. And I don't mean that in a mean way or in a, like, I don't want to work there sort of way, but like, remember I had applied to like, you know, 100 places, and I was kind of desperate. And by the time Rockstar got back to me, and it was literally on the same day, I know this sounds dramatic, this is the God's honest truth, on the day that I had given up, I had walked over to my favorite cafe with my best friend. I was like, I don't think this is possible. I don't think it's possible to get an entry-level position in the games industry. Maybe I have the wrong qualifications. I don't know what's wrong with me, or I don't know if I'm doing something wrong. I don't think I can get in. I literally got a call from Rockstar Games that day where they were like, could we do an interview? And I was just like, what the fuck? Okay, you know. So I do this phone interview. I completely freaked out over it. I did, you know, like a ton of research on my interviewers. I remember like I had this, it was so funny, like this research and meditation circle that I had like spread out papers, you know, across my bed, just kind of like, okay, don't screw up. Did the phone interview. Less than a week later, I had a request for an on-site. But that story gets a little bit funnier because the on-site was in Southern California, San Diego, right? And so I was to fly down there, and then I needed to drive to the office to do the interview.
Mm.
The problem being I didn't have a driver's license.
Hey.
Which is, and I actually didn't know how to drive. And that's really not a normal thing for an American living in California, right? Except for I grew up in a college town that was very bike friendly. And
Yeah.
I think I mentioned this before, I was pretty dirt poor. So I wasn't going to buy a car anyway. So I didn't have anything to learn on. I was like, I'll get my license when I get my license. So suddenly I'm in this really awkward position of like, yeah, I'd love to interview at your company. I don't know how I'm going to get there. So they were cool enough to get me a driver.
Oh, wow. Really? That's great.
Yeah.
That's so
So
good.
I had a chauffeur drop me off at the office, which is kind of hilarious. Did the interview. It was an all-day interview. It was grueling. And I was given a whiteboard design test. I was interviewed by the lead of Chinatown Wars and the lead of Red Dead Redemption. I didn't know what they were working on. They didn't mention it or anything like that. But anyway, I do the design test on the whiteboard, and one guy leans back in his chair. I remember he just kind of like leans back, right? He looks at the other guy and he goes, "You ever seen that solution before?" And the other one goes, "Nope." And I'm like, "Oh, I messed up. I messed up so bad."
Oh,
Well, thank you
no.
very much. It's been very nice. Yeah, it's been a really good experience. You know, that sort of thing.
Did I tell you that I'm teaching game design as well?
I know, right? I also teach freshman game design. I have no experience. Yeah. So, but less than a week later, I had an offer letter in my inbox and was like, "Oh, like I
That's
did the thing.
amazing.
I'm moving to San Diego. I need to learn how to drive now."
Wow.
So,
How long does that take in the US? Is it quite well?
I knocked it out in a couple weeks. My boyfriend taught me how to drive on
Oh, wow.
his
Great.
300ZX, so with a
Oh,
racing clutch.
nice.
No,
Well,
nice, not forgiving.
not to learn in.
No, I took my test on a much more friendly car, on an automatic. But yeah, it was pretty crazy. Like I had to pack up my entire life, find a car, buy a car, take my driver's test, get a license, and then like drive
Wow.
down, move, find a place to live, hope that I didn't move in with an axe murderer, like that kind of stuff.
It's weird, isn't it? Like that moment with going to GDC for the first time, going to Nagoya, then going to San Diego. It's very impressive. You just seem to throw yourself into these scenarios, and then, as you put it earlier, with going to Nagoya, like survive essentially, survive until you can advance. And what a great company to go and work for.
I couldn't have picked a better place to start, especially my first game that I shipped was Red Dead Redemption,
Yeah.
at the right place, right time. I didn't know what they were working on at the time. And I show up and I'm like, "Oh, you guys are making a cowboy game. That's rad." "Oh, it's a really pretty cowboy game. Okay. I love cowboys. I'm into this,
That's great.
Yeah. So.
Well, you also worked on Max Payne, didn't you? When you
Mhm.
were, and I've got to ask you this because obviously, like, given your role, given your like expertise, Max Payne is, for me, it's like the inception of bullet time was Max Payne. I remember back in the day, like, I think Matrix had already come out, and like you had bullet time was a huge thing in the Matrix, and then obviously Max Payne came out, and it was just done so well. And I believe you worked on Max Payne 3.
That's right.
As like a systems designer, does something like bullet time restrict or encourage, the way you approach the creative process?
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm a huge Max Payne fan as well. Like it was the reason why I ended up on Max Payne 3 is because we had finished Red Dead and then we finished the Undead Nightmare pack also that came out after that. It was like the zombie DLC, right? We were kind of in a transition phase and I actually put in a request with Rockstar and said, like, "I know Max Payne is being worked on right now. I love this series so much. Can I work on it?" And they said yes, but they also said, "We want you to go on site." And so it was being developed in Vancouver, British Columbia. And so they shipped me up to Vancouver, British Columbia for a year and a half, and I worked on site with that team. That was pretty rad. But to answer your bullet time question, I think that bullet time is an absolute joy to design for. I kind of wish like more games had it, So it allows us to create these really intricate and rich, like busy set pieces for the player to absorb. And I worked on, basically touched more or less every single level in that game. The way it worked is like we had multiple Rockstar studios working on the game, and we kind of divvied up the levels in chunks. Like you get this chunk, you get this chunk, you get this chunk. But by the end, we were all kind of scrambling back and forth and just, fixing things everywhere. So I ended up touching pretty much everything. But I have two examples where bullet time really shone in Max Payne 3, right? So there's a police precinct level. We had forced bullet time sequences, right? Where those were really exotic, where we'd put Max into like a special animation state, we'd lock down the player controls in certain ways. It'd be like a really nice exotic sequence. And there's, of course, the player initiated bullet time, right? So there's this one in the police precinct where like Max flies through a door and he jumps onto a cart, lays on the cart, and then just kind of, it turns into a rail shooter at that point, but it's all forced slow-mo. But it lets you sit and like watch. Max Payne's very fast-paced, right? And so you're in reaction mode all the time. So it gives you a chance to really appreciate, the shattering glass, the sound effects, really parse where all the enemies are, get like some really nice perfect headshots, feel very skilled, feel very awesome. That's a really cool version of it. The other version of it, and this is a sequence that I worked on for a really long time, is you walk into a room, I feel like it's like a science lab or a forensics lab or something like that. And as you walk in real time, repellers come through the window and break through the window. And it's like 4 repellers break through a window. It's a really complex sequence to happen in gameplay. Most players, though, freak out and mash the bullet time button, right? Which allows you to see how much work we put into that, right? Getting the ropes to line up and getting the animations just right. I mean, I must have frame by framed and made sure that like the second their feet touch the window, it breaks. So it breaks at the right time. And then, the effects guys come in and make sure that the effects are all perfect and stuff. That's pretty much the only way in like those fast-paced action games, bullet time, that you can really take your time to savor those moments and appreciate the craft, right? Because like a lot goes into that.
Yeah, that's incredible. Quick time events like, QTE, it's weird that they're not, I'm not saying obviously this is the same as QTE, but also it's the similar ethos of being able to, at points in a game, just appreciate, like you said, the animation, the actual like the conflict, if you like, what's actually going on. Because often when you're part of it, and obviously when you're the one putting in all the commands and say activating bullet time manually, it's almost like you're trying to survive. So you're trying to like kill everything as quickly as possible. For example, whereas QTE, it's more about, again, you're surviving, but it might not be trying to kill everything. You are literally just trying to survive through a scripted set piece. And do you know what was interesting actually when I was looking, obviously like doing a bit of stalking with yourself, I saw that you got like special thanks for Red Dead 2.
I did, and I did work on it.
Yeah, in pre-production, right?
I did,
in 2012.
Yes,
and then, and then it came out like 6 years later.
Yeah.
So obviously, I mean, I don't know how long it was in development for. I'm assuming that's 6, 7, 8 years. But is it tough when you work on something in pre-production? Because you'd left before, obviously, not long after that, obviously working on that in pre-production. Is it quite a tough thing not being part of the bigger project and not seeing it through its development cycles?
Yeah. So first, I just want to say that I thought it was it's a really classy play on Rockstar's part to even include my name in special things. I did not expect that. And I didn't expect it because when I worked there, and I know they've changed quite a bit since then, but when I worked there, it was still policy to leave off the names of developers that had left before the project shipped. And that meant literally any time before the project shipped. So if you had put in your full, 7 years or what have you, and you left 3 weeks before the project shipped, that was it. Your name gets off, like, yeah. So I know a few people that got shorted a very powerful credit on RDR1, and that was really heartbreaking for me. So I thought it was very cool of Rockstar to reconsider that policy. But what's funny about RDR2 coming out was that, I'd been at Crystal for quite some time at that point. I was very established at Crystal. So telling people that like, oh, by the way, I worked on RDR2, like watching them do the mental math, right? Of like, wait, but you've been here, how is that? It's like, yeah, man, that game's been in production for some time. But to your question, yeah, it is hard not seeing a project through to the end, certainly. But by the time I left Rockstar, I was feeling a lot of pull to Northern California. And the reason for that is that my long-term partner lived up there. So I've been with my partner since college. And when we graduated, we both were in the same, more or less the same program. He got a internship at Crystal Dynamics, and I went down to Rockstar. And so we were apart for, I think it was 3.5 years, something like that. In between that, right, I was down at San Diego and then up at Vancouver and back down to San Diego again. And so by that point, I was like, I am ready to not do this long distance relationship thing anymore. So if I can land a job in Northern California, that'd be great. Yeah, so that's more or less why I left Rockstar in the end. But it was really cool with Red Dead to see what changed and kind of what stayed the same from the original pre-production pitch. Like I remember we had this really beautiful concept art wall that would showed off all the regions in the game, right? All the locales and what they were supposed to look like. And I remember walking up and down being completely hype, going like, oh, this game's going to be absolutely gorgeous. And a lot of those concept pieces, were very representative of what ended up being in the final ship game.
Was that your driving reason to, move then from Rockstar to Crystal Dynamics? 3.5 years is a long time to be away from your partner.
That was one of the main reasons for sure. I was still only, 3 or so years into my career at that point. So I still didn't have, any sort of extreme confidence, like even having shipped Red Dead and Max Payne at that point, like that I would be able to land wherever I wanted. So I was kind of, again, shotgunning resumes up into the Bay Area going like,
Mm.
anyone interested? I'd like to move, and landing at Crystal was kind of interesting because I had applied to Crystal, certainly, but I hadn't heard back from them during my
Mm.
entire kind of investigation, reach out, feelers process. And so by the time I was getting ready to move, I had offer letters from Disney and from Telltale Games. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, well, I've got these two. I could do the move. And I only ended up even having a chance at Crystal by virtue of the fact that my partner, who was at the time, I think, like a junior designer on the original, like the Tomb Raider reboot, the first game,
Yeah.
was in the break room talking to a coworker of his who was just casually asking, "Hey, how's your girlfriend?" And he's like, "Oh, she's looking for a new job." My now narrative director, and who was narrative director at the time, overhears this conversation and goes like, "Oh yeah, what's she worked on?" And then suddenly they have this conversation. My partner hooks me up with the narrative director. We start emailing. We had this absolutely insane, really pleasant exchange over the course of about a week, right? Where we're like emailing one another over, like talking about, I mean, obviously career stuff to start, but we really hit it off. And like the next thing I know, we're like talking about like raising his kids and like, like life philosophy and stuff like that. So it
I
was just
love
like there was
that.
a ton of chemistry. Anyway, so like John, who's my narrative director, leaned on HR. HR expedited an on-site interview. I like flew up just kind of like at the last minute, interviewed, hit it off with the team, loved what I saw, got an offer that day and accepted it. So, just kind of went like from
Wow.
like, oh yeah, like let's talk to this person and done.
That's so good.
Yeah.
That's so good. Do you find it weird, right? Like if we didn't have these interactions and relationships, that may just never have happened.
It's another
Like,
one of those weird things that you look at and go like, well, if that hadn't happened, I don't know where I would have ended up.
yeah. I mean, what Disney or Telltale would be.
Does Disney or Telltale, yeah. And that would have been a different story because Telltale is now closed.
Yeah, of course. It is mad, isn't it? Like, it just seems that your career just goes through these moments. Like you said, like when you were drawing out your timeline of like your career and your like experiences, like really does have like these pinnacle moments of this happened, but it's actually like a story within a story. Like often when you speak to people, it's just, and I think most people are like this, but like, yeah, I left here because I wanted a new challenge, or I left here because I wanted to do this. But the actual experience of actually joining that new company is normally quite linear, right? Whereas yours, you do have these relationships, you do have that built with John, with your narrative lead. So yeah, I think it's really cool. And you obviously joined at a really, really cool time because it was when the Lara Croft reboot and Tomb Raider reboot was coming out, being developed. And it's obviously an incredible IP, right? Like it's a staple of like action adventure. It's so much more now because it's almost like a narrative-led action adventure / survival game. What was it like being part of the project, and was there like trepidation because it is such a big IP and reboots can be, you got to please a lot more people than you do with like a fresh IP?
So for me, I joined the Tomb Raider 2013 reboot a little later in production. I don't remember if they were post alpha or not. It's been a while, but anyway, I was hired to work on an incubator that ended up not making it at Crystal, which was fine. But they asked me to quote cut my teeth on the reboot game. So I ended up immediately joining the reboot game. And what cracked me up is that they were like, "We need someone to work on our ambient systems, right? We need a system designer to work on getting the game's world to feel alive." I got a chuckle out of the fact that they put the Red Dead girl on the hunting mechanic.
It's like, we've seen you do this before. Like,
oh, she worked on an open world game. We can get her to do this, So that's what I ended up doing for them. I ended up doing a few other things, but that was kind of where I had started. Also, they had like a proprietary tool set, right? And all of that. So I arrived from Rockstar, went like, okay, new tools, new everything. Had got to learn how all this works. Got to learn how to navigate this existing game, do all the hunting stuff. Okay, now ship, go, that sort of thing. So no trepidation when I joined to work on Tomb Raider. By that point, I had shipped, 2 incredible third-person action adventures, and so like I felt really at home working on Tomb Raider. I just kind of felt like this is something that I know how to do at this point, and so I feel like I have something to bring to this game. I've absolutely loved working on the reboot games. I think that's an incredible honor, just the fact that I've managed to land jobs working on 2 of my beloved franchises, right?
Yeah.
I've gotten to work on Max Payne and the Tomb Raider series. I definitely played Tomb Raider as a kid and absolutely adored it. I've not only worked on Reboot's very fun to work on, don't get me wrong, right? I also got to work on Lara Croft and the Temple of Osiris, which was the little top-down like co-op adventure
completely
game.
different. Yeah.
Those are like, the vibe there is totally different, right? On the reboot series, it's all about Lara being like smart and resourceful, and it's about celebrating her passion for wonder and history and adventure, all kind of while maintaining that like tight action-packed cadence, kind of much like Max Payne does, right? Like you're expected, like, let's go from beat to beat, let's go, give the player nice opportunities to feel cool, all that good stuff. In the arcade series, there was way more of like an anything goes vibe, which honestly is like kind of a breath of fresh air for someone who's used to working on these like gritty, grounded action adventure games. So when I was handed Lara Croft and the Temple of Osiris, right, like just the fact that we could experiment in a very mechanics forward kind of way, we didn't have to justify everything, right? We're just like, you're fighting a giant dung beetle, you're fighting a giant crocodile, like you can turn into a rolly ball. Like why? Like, I don't know. It just, I made a rolly ball and it looked cool and, that sort of stuff. All the development on that game on Osiris was very much about finding fun first. Right. And justifying it later. Not great if you're, a narrative person. Awesome if you're a systems designer or a gameplay designer. You're just like, freedom,
Does it make it harder though to have like all that freedom? Because does it all of a sudden you're like, I have to be overtly creative because you're like, the shackles have been unchained. And, sometimes I can imagine it means that there are so many ideas and it's like, which ones do you implement?
Yeah, that goes into like prototyping and things like that, right? It's just like when you have that freedom, you can just kind of explore these little bite-sized bits of gameplay and see if they have promise. And if they do, you can move those forward. It gives you a nice little canvas to just not have to worry about why the character in the reboot series, you always have to worry about why Lara's doing something, right? And make sure that it stays true to her brand, true to her personality, true to the character that you're trying to present. That smart, resourceful, she always finds the secret way in stuff, right? Like the reverence for history and the sense of wonder and all that. That's always in every decision that you make. It's not that it's not in the arcade title, right? It's just that you get to do some fun stuff first that's strictly just, does this feel great on the sticks before having to justify all of those other things.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And I think it's good to see Crystal do that, right? Like it was good to see, actually, let's see what else we can do with the IP because the reboot's been a success, right? And it's like, let's just see how far we can take it. Do you think they will create another one?
I want them to so bad. I don't know. I honestly, like, I don't know. I don't have any visibility on what our slate looks like, in the next handful of years. But I can tell you that there's enthusiasm on the team for that type of game. There's definitely a pocket of us that love working on couch co-op games. Like I personally have a soft spot for co-op games, and I don't get many opportunities in my career to work on one. I know that there is love. There is definitely love among the developers at Crystal for those types of games.
They're quite a core. I was playing Overcooked with my son and my partner.
I love Overcooked.
Yeah, and
it's so good.
It's such an incredible, like, all stressful co-op experience because obviously you always got that person. It's really weird how it mimics real life, but everyone wants to cook, right? No one wants to wash up. Like, so.
I love it.
But it's so true. And then like you just end up getting into arguments and yeah, but it always starts off like, positive themes. It's weird, isn't it? I always feel like co-op games are almost like vintage in some ways, right? Like they're such incredible experiences. They just don't seem as mainstream as they used to. And I think you'd think the internet would give more access to this, but I do sometimes think like the greater player base is actually focused more on, like MOBAs and battle royale games and things like this. But actually core gaming experiences, especially with people who don't play games regularly, I find co-op games by far the best.
They're so great,
because you introduce them to something, but you do it together. I think it's amazing. And working at Temple of Osiris, right? Like, so obviously, like you said, it's like thematically, you're still in the Lara Croft world and you're still part of that same IP, but at the same time, like you said, you have greater freedom. Like, how do you do that? It's the same with the reboot. How do you innovate, but also stay true to the source?
So for a game like Tomb Raider, it can be really overwhelming, even keeping the franchise's history in your head, right? Yeah. Lara Croft has been around for 25 years. So that's 25 years of games and comics and animes and all sorts of other stuff, right? All sorts of little transmedia, little projects, right? So when I was designing for the reboot, I would spend a lot of time watching like Let's Plays of the older games, poking around on Twitter at like fan conversations and like looking at message boards. I'm sorry for fans of Tomb Raider, like the devs do look, we do kind of creep on that kind of stuff. We're interested in hearing what you have to say, but this helped me like root myself in the game's actual history while kind of comparing it to what resonated with the fans of the game today. But the thing that I liked to consider even more was my own nostalgia and what I remembered from the older games and how my memory compared to like what actually was, you know?
Yeah.
Because I think that there's a lot of fuel for innovation in those rose-colored glasses, right? That's what your brain does, the actual experience versus what you took away from it. That considering when the original Tomb Raider was made, right? Like the graphics, it's PS1 graphics, like completely different design paradigms and things like that. Like things have changed a great deal. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity in that gap to
Yeah.
take those things and use those as inspiration for moving the franchise forward.
I just remember like you had to do like pixel perfect jumps in the original Tomb
Well, because she had
Raider.
tank controls, right?
Yeah, like, and it was crazy difficult. I remember being in like, oh god, it's such a long ago now, but like a museum, and I remember these pillars and jumping from pillar to pillar and grabbing onto the ledge, and I literally couldn't grab onto this ledge, and I thought, well, am I even in the right place? Should I be trying to grab onto this ledge? And then you'd explore everywhere, and you'd like backtrack so much, and you'd realize that yeah, no, you are supposed to grab onto the ledge.
What's also really funny for a dev like working with Lara Croft, right, is that she's already done so much, right? That even if you do pitch like a new idea for her, chances are she's already done it in like an animated series or a comic or an offshoot game, right? So it can be really challenging coming up with something genuinely new and innovative for her.
Do you think there is a point where you're like, it just gets crazy what she's doing, so we can't do. I mean, I guess that's the challenge, isn't it? It's staying true to the source, but do you get a point where you're like, well, there's nothing else we can do because we have exhausted it? And unfortunately, that is the payoff of having a grounded world.
I don't feel like we've exhausted it. It feels that way sometimes, though, right? Like, 'cause I mean, like, I know internally we've been like, hey, let's have her do X and Y. And then someone comes back and goes like, oh, done it already, And then you have to make the decision of like, well, I've done it already, but has it been long enough that we could do it again? Is it weird if we do it again? Does it muck with the canon? Like all of that stuff.
I think it'd be so hard to actually find who stores that information. Is there someone who just stores this is everything that she's done?
So we're lucky that we have someone on our team. Her name is Megan Marie. She was an absolute massive Tomb Raider fan in her youth, and she started working for Crystal, I believe, as our like one of our community coordinators, and is since basically our resident Tomb Raider accessibility, all sorts of things expert, right? And she herself is just a Bible of Tomb Raider knowledge. One, she's just so connected to our community, she's just constantly aware of what our fans have done in the past and are currently doing. But she just also has an encyclopedic knowledge of the game. She's actually she wrote a book, had a whole bunch of like developer interviews and stuff like that in that I think it was for the 20-year anniversary? I'll have to look it up. But yeah, like I think it's 20 years of an icon. Yeah, 20 years of an icon. She wrote an entire book that got published that was like, here's Tomb Raider front to back,
Brilliant.
So it's a gift having her on the team, right? As a gut check for those sorts of things.
That's incredible.
If we didn't have her, though, we'd definitely use her book. That's for sure.
That's so good. It's so nice to hear. Like, obviously, you naturally assume that everyone's like this, but it's so nice to hear. Like, there's that level of passion from like yourself and other people on the team who just know Tomb Raider like so well.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you. So, obviously, we've spoken quite a bit about innovation and like how to innovate within the original source. But did you have like a development process when working on a new project? Do you like have a template in your mind about how you're going to approach each project? What's that like?
It does change from project to project, but I like overall, yeah. I mean, at this point in my career, I definitely have a process. So almost any time I start a new project, I allot myself a good chunk of time to do research. And what research might mean changes from task to task. So this might be like competitive research, GDC talks, state of the industry, history, random Googling, reading books, whatever's appropriate for the project, right? I take extensive notes during that whole process. I often do like deep dives on concepts. I get really obsessive about stuff, and that helps me become kind of a little mini subject expert, right? And I refer back to those notes many times over the course of development. But from there, I really like to jump into like on-screen pixels as soon as possible, if I can. So I don't know how familiar you are with development, but like some people talk about like design documents or things like that. I don't tend to jump straight into design documents right off the bat. I like to get it in play and kind of get a tactile feel for. I mean, I'm a gameplay designer, right? So yeah. get a tactile feel for what's working and what's not working. Like, I'll give an example, right? So I worked on some procedural content for one of the Rise of the Tomb Raider DLC packs. It was called Cold Darkness Awakened. I created a little puzzle that could assemble itself at runtime. It was all programmatic, right? And so it would match symbols and colors and all sorts of things and create a combination that you're supposed to enter in order to pass something, right? You solve a puzzle and you win, sort of thing. So that came about because my lead at the time was we were all playing Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes during lunch. I don't know if you remember that game.
No.
Okay, I'll explain what this game's like.
Please,
it's really cool, actually. It's a very, very
explain.
cool. Yeah, it's also got a great name. The Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. It's one person's at a PC and they've got a bomb, right? And the bomb's got a whole bunch of like switches and levers and buttons and a timer and all that stuff, right? So they're there controlling the bomb. And then there's actually like a printed manual, right? That everyone else is given. And so, and there's multiple printed manuals and stuff. But the point of the game is while the bomb is ticking, it's about to explode, the person with the bomb is trying to communicate with the people with the instructions, on how to defuse the bomb. And so you're having to like rapidly flip through these pages and talk about, like, oh, look for this symbol or look for this color or cut this wire, don't cut this wire, that sort of thing. And it's very, very exciting, very stressful, very fast paced and very repeatable because the manual is quite thick, and the bomb can be reconfigured and all that good stuff. So my lead at the time was like, do you think you could do this or something like this using Tomb Raider verbs? And I was like, one, that's a weird question. And two, okay, give me like 1 week uninterrupted and I'll come back to you with an answer, right? And so I just kind of sat and jammed and prototyped and played with, creating something that felt like it fit in Tomb Raider, felt like it used Tomb Raider verbs, right? Action verbs and things like that, and was truly procedural and, and had legs for being able to, create many different types of permutations at runtime. So once I had that, I handed it to my boss and had him play it. And I'm a huge stickler. I'm very picky about playtests, even at this early stage. I firmly believe that it's imperative for a designer to be quiet, keep a still face, step back, right? Watch the person engaging with your content and just let them do it. And many designers, even experienced designers, really, really struggle with this, right? Because it can be so painful, especially keep in mind, these prototypes they're simple. They're visually very low fidelity, right? There's a lot of, we call it like designer squinting that you have to do, right? You have to be like, okay, this thing's a block, but it's supposed to be, this sort of thing. So there's a lot of stuff that you just kind of have to forgive in these early prototypes. But I find that in that first few minutes that you watch someone pick up a controller and interface with the software, that's the purest feedback you're ever going to get for whether it's a finished system, a finished gameplay, or a prototype, right? And so it's so important to just shut up, right? And swallow your pride. If it breaks in some horrible way, if they don't see the point of what you're trying to do, if they miss something that you feel is completely obvious, let it all happen. Take notes and incorporate that into your next revision. So even with this Cold Darkness thing, this little prototype that I made, right? Like I step back, I let my boss touch it, like play it and all of that good stuff. And we figured out that like, yeah, it's got legs. We feel pretty good about it. I'll also say like, I'll only really ever nudge a playtest if it's like critically broken. Like it's actually not going to recover. And even then though, I'll try to just restart it and see if we can play it again. Right. See if I can get a valuable experience out of that. But like, that's the only time I'll really ever interfere. But anyway, so like when a prototype shows promise, like then I'll actually start going through the motions to get buy-in on it, which is like evaluating what it'll take to complete, how it fits among our existing goals, what resources I need, like all that really kind of unsexy stuff, the really the game development stuff, scheduling.
Budgets. God. It's crazy to hear you talk about it because it just sounds like digitally playing with Play-Doh, right? Like
it is.
It just sounds so fun, right? Like it sounds, and I think your approach to not being a backseat driver when people are playtesting something is really good. Because I mean, like naturally, I think people, they really want to talk about something they've created when someone first gets it. So I get like, it's just, I almost feel like naturally people want to be like, do this. And I think it's great that you just step back and then that way you can get the most qualitative feedback because you haven't tried to create any kind of prejudices or anything like this when they first approached the prototype you've been working on. And it kind of leads me quite nicely into my next question, which is like, what is your objective when you begin working on a project? Like, what do you want to leave that project with, and what makes you feel good? You can say, like, I did this. This is what I'm going to go out to achieve, and I'm going to do this. And this is several questions in one, but
Okay.
does that change from project to project, or do you always have that same objective?
So that's actually changed a lot as I've gotten older, believe it or not. So when I was younger, I might have answered this question with something like, I want to work on as many different types of projects as I can. I was really hungry for experience and working with different teams. And I mean, I have a love of all video games, right? And so it's really hard to just be like, I want to work on this type. I know I want to work on everything. Like I haven't made an RTS, let's make an RTS.
Yeah.
But now I'd say that my objective is to create a healthy dev environment for my fellow teammates. And that might mean through mentorship or like the development of workflow and improving tools, or maybe even seeking improvements to production methodology. But I really turned my attention to my team as my career has matured. The games are still important, obviously, right? Like, like I'm here to make games 100%, but a happy, healthy, supported team is going to make far better
Mm.
content for far longer. And that's a really important thing to stress than a team that doesn't have those things. And now that I kind of know what I'm doing, whereas like, little Alicia that joined Rockstar out of college was like, burp, no idea. Now that I kind of know what I'm doing, I feel like I can offer that kind of support to my team and help guide better culture, better day to day for them, right? So that they can make better games.
Yeah, I think that's a very grown up answer.
Oh,
I think
thanks.
it's yeah.
It's
It
so
feels like
dry, but it's so true, right?
no, I don't. I think it's great. I think you've come on leaps and bounds, since
Mm.
since you fled to Nagoya, and it's interesting. I was reading recently CEOs and people who generally do well as they like progress throughout their careers or founding a company. Often, like the best attributes they can have is building and encouraging and nurturing a team, because you can never do everything right. And if you can build and nurture a team, and you can bring on people to tell you, obviously, you what to do and to guide you as much as you guide them, then you're going to achieve so much more as a group than you will as an individual.
That's exactly it, right? And
Mm.
figuring out, that's something I realized as I went on in my career. I mean, you kind of know it, like everyone knows it, right? It's so cliche, right? The people can do more than just one person, but like, really feeling it and understanding it, I think comes with, career maturity. So, or,
Yeah,
time in the industry.
it's a very apt response. But looking back, I mean, obviously, I know you've spoken out your love for Max Payne and for Tomb Raider. Do you have a favorite project that you've
It's
worked on?
That's so hard for me to pick. I have such a cheesy answer for this. I have a few. So, okay, Red Dead I think was my most formative project. Like
Mm.
straight out of college, big leagues, like buckle up, kiddo, right? So, I learned an absolute shit ton on Red Dead, and those lessons stay with me today. Max Payne 3 was the first time I really felt like I was part of a close-knit team of people who were like passionately cared about their craft and about their game. So like I felt so connected and really so part of the Vancouver team, and I have the fondest memories of working with that group. But I would say that Lara Croft and the Temple of Osiris probably holds the biggest place in my heart, being both a game that I'm really proud of, and one of those games where I think I grew the most during production. I also think the Osiris team may have been the most creative, most talented, and most professional team of devs I've ever had the pleasure of working with. And that's like
Oh,
part of it was just we were tight and close knit. It was a small team.
mm,
It was a small team, but it was a small team of people. Like I said, there's that heart of people at Crystal who really just love those games. The little top down arcade games. Those were the guys that were working on Osiris, and I was part of that group. So there's just every day. You know how you said it's like just kind of like playing with Play-Doh, right? Like every day is just kind
yeah.
of fun. It wasn't by any means the easiest project. Like we were on some pretty tight deadlines, and it was grueling at times. But like I walked away from that game feeling very accomplished and very close to my coworkers, which was really really cool.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
great. Yeah, I got that feeling from you when we obviously, as we've like spoken, that was the project that you can sense that level of, obviously you have enthusiasm for all your projects, and that definitely comes across. But just that almost like that emotional resonance with something where you're like, not only did you get to express yourself, but you did it with people that you get on extremely well with, and obviously that's, I don't know, like, development within a team is always that's one of the best things about it, when everyone's on the same
yeah.
page and everyone's playing with Play-Doh at the same time.
It's true. Yeah. And Osiris was the first game in my career that I really had control over a lot of the game. I worked on all of the game's kind of interactive objects, the way the player interacted with the world, and I worked on all the boss fights, so like that's a big chunk of game right there.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I hope they do make another one,
Me
right?
too.
Like,
I
obviously,
hope so too.
not pushing you
To
on it,
everyone listening, I don't know. I genuinely do not know.
I mean, stepping away from like I suppose your day-to-day role and like looking at like almost like bigger picture stuff. I'm incredibly lucky, I think. I'm like privileged to be able to work in the games industry, and it's obviously grown at a phenomenal pace. And it's very liberal, I suppose, with its use and how it with content in general. And it's fantastic to obviously see new people coming in and at an educational and institutional level, like being taken far more seriously now than it was like 2 decades ago. But at the same time, obviously, there are some incredibly poor elements within it. You do have consistent reports of poor work environments, discrimination, marginalization. What do you think the industry can do to prevent the issues we keep experiencing and reading about?
Yeah. So this is a huge question. It's a very heavy question too, and this is on my mind all the time, both because of my own experiences, and I know the experiences of my peers and the people coming into the industry. The thing that's on my mind and the thing that has most of my focus right now is advocating for women and people of color in leadership at AAA studios. It's something that I am very passionate about at Crystal. I think diversity in leadership is critical to cultural change, right? And I just want to be really clear. I absolutely do not think that most of the white male developers that I work with are bad people,
Yeah.
On the contrary, I've historically adored and greatly respected most of my fellow developers for like the course of my career, and I've had some really incredibly fulfilling professional relationships form over the years. But a homogenous culture just naturally breeds blind spots for discriminatory or unfair thinking, right? And it's an unconscious thing that it just doesn't occur to people, like in their day to day. And I just want to kind of supply some examples of stuff that's happened to me, of kind of seemingly innocent interactions that I've had with my coworkers, right? But they impacted me in negative ways, right? Let's say many years ago, right? An artist colleague just kind of out of the blue lamented just how much harder I had to work than other people just to be taken seriously. And he was referring to my gender, right? I was super young in my career at the time and like stunned to hear this because I didn't perceive myself any different from my fellow developers. And it was heartbreaking to hear someone tell me that I was. I was once told by a director level dev after having a very heated conversation about validating player mechanics that I was too passionate. And,
That's awful.
and I couldn't be spoken to, because there was a wall, right? My passion was creating a wall. On an annual review, an actual like on paper annual review, I was once told that I was perceived as aggressive. And that was tough for me to hear because that's something that I've heard for a lot of my life. But that feedback was immediately followed up with, but don't change. We really like that about you. That's a hard message to hear. And that's something that I've actually spent most of my career oscillating between, being chastised for being too intense and then being praised for it. It's hard to handle. But I think one of the most recent ones that I wanted to mention is that when I was pregnant, a director level developer over the coffee machine, right, jokingly asked me when I was leaving the company. And I was also asked that exact same question by like a fellow developer who just simply didn't think about what they might be communicating to me by asking that kind of question. It's because it's just a funny question that you ask people, right? And so my point by offering all of these personal experiences is that, I had these interactions because culture, my studio culture, which is a very homogenous culture, allowed this kind of thinking to be normal and accepted. Right. And ultimately, that's just harmful to people who don't have a voice in that culture. That is why, while there are plenty of things that the game industry could be doing better, I think to see change on the inside, allowing diverse voices at the table of leadership where decisions are made is one of the biggest things that we can do. So for me, I'm particularly focused on female developers and leadership. I'm sure you can guess why. To really kind of drive this home, the reason for that is because I am well over a decade into my career and I have never worked on a team with a female developer in a position of senior leadership. Wow. I have never received mentorship from a female dev in a leadership position on any game that I've been on. I have seen women struggle and fight to earn senior leadership positions over the course of my career, and I have experienced myself periods of time feeling unheard by my fellow male developers simply because they cannot relate to my experiences. That to me is one of the biggest things that we have power to change, right? And like
Mm,
every dev, has power to put pressure on their leadership to become more inclusive, to hire, a more diverse
mm.
staff to represent them. On a more micro level, I'm also focused on mentorship within my studio, making sure that younger designers have a senior dev to go to discuss their career and their aspirations, their interpersonal issues, growth goals, that kind of thing, because that's simply something I didn't have in my formative years.
It's hard to hear, isn't it? Because it's,
Mm,
when it's something like everyone cares about, and we are so like liberal in terms of our use with technology, and it's such a forward thinking medium. Like games is like obviously embracing is one of the best things about the industry is it embraces change, which will enhance the experience of the people it's creating its products for. It's really on that. Yeah, that's why I find it really tough. Like obviously when I have guests on and we talk about this, because as much as it embraces change in that way, like it's so archaic
hmm
in its approach to people that make the games. I think the change definitely has to come from within, but
hmm
it has to be a constant across. But
And it's
yeah, I
not going to
mean,
happen until other people are there, sharing their experiences and their points of view. Diversity, I think, is just one of the big keys to getting that to change.
I think, yeah, even with like 0 hour contracts, I know this is like slightly different, but I think it sets the precedent that you could argue that QA tester is like one of the entry level positions. Not always at all. They're extremely vital to the success of a game.
Absolutely.
And I think that's why it's very disappointing when you do hear that they haven't been treated well, right? Like you hear stories about them not being invited to the dev
I
parties
hate
or to
that.
launch parties.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's infuriating because it's like without that feedback, you don't have a product, right? Like you
hmm
just don't have a product. And you really want to be protecting and nurturing all your talent. But they're often treated like that from their entry point and like put on 0 hour contracts. That just sets an awful precedent throughout the rest of your career within the industry. Because you're like, oh, well, basically everyone's just a commodity.
Mm.
And it's awful to hear your experiences. And even like, being pregnant and being asked, like, when are you leaving? Like, what? It's an awful
So what am I
assumption.
going to quit?
Like,
Like, oh, I was
yeah, well,
incensed.
is
I
that
was absolutely
it?
incensed.
I mean, what is that like? Like, having kids and, being a mum within the industry, like,
My approach to my career has changed a great deal, right? I think the short answer, at least from watching other parents before me have children, is that it is challenging having kids in the game industry. My experience has been a bit different. Let me explain. So I have one little boy, right? He's my first and my only, who was born on the day that California closed at the beginning of the pandemic. So
well,
I don't know if my experience has been easier or harder, right?
yeah, geez.
Um, than it might have been before the pandemic because this is just my experience. So my little boy Ash, he's had a pretty profound and fascinating effect on my work-life balance in particular. Before he was born, I was definitely the type of person who would just kind of gravitate towards putting in extra hours at work, particularly if I was feeling time crunched or like really passionate about the work I was doing. Like if I get really wrapped up in one of those prototypes, for example, it's a tricky thing. It's why crunch is controversial, right? Is that defining it is very tough. There's a concept called flow when you're developing, right? And sometimes you do just want to sit and finish a thought, and that could
Mm,
require a few extra hours at work, right? I'm not advocating crunch at all. I want to make that very clear. But, I was a type of person who would be like, I'd like to wrap this up instead of leaving it, 6 today, and I'll leave it 8. With Ash around, I am firmly time boxed. I get up in the morning, make him his breakfast, lunch, and snacks. He goes to daycare at 8 a.m. I drive him there. I pick him up at 5 p.m. every day. I make him dinner, hang out with him a bit, bathe him, read to him, put him to bed. So my time to
mm,
work is in that little time that he's at daycare. And I don't free up until about 8:30 p.m. when he goes to bed. And at that point, I need to think about eating something myself, like having dinner, cleaning the
mhm,
house and prepping for bed, right? Because he's going to get up at 5:30 or 6 the next morning. I just really don't have the luxury anymore of putting a few extra hours in here and there to finish something I didn't get to during the day, which was just something that I just routinely did throughout my career. So
mm,
what's interesting about that is, to my surprise, that it has made me a better developer. I am way better now at prioritizing and time boxing than I ever have. I'm better at messaging changes to my schedule to others. I'm better at delegating and time estimating. I'm more respectful of my own time, right, than I've ever been. I
Yeah.
know it's a weird statement to make, but like my time is very valuable and taxed now at a
Mm.
much higher rate than it was before. So it's kind of wild the effect it's had on me. It's just made me a more efficient worker, you know?
Yeah.
That's actually made my job more satisfying to me because my work-life balance has improved.
Yeah.
So if you had asked me, 5 years ago, if I was capable of taking on, like a new leadership position at work or right, new responsibilities while raising a toddler, I would have laughed at you. But like
Yeah.
that's kind of what's happened is I've figured out this nice way to do my job to my satisfaction while making sure that he has enough time
Mm.
to, get the attention that he needs from his mother. What's really interesting is I have pretty regular lunches with a principal systems designer at Undead Labs, actually. And the reason why he and I started having lunches is that we met briefly at a little conference, a little talk, right? And we were like, wow, are we doing the same thing right now? He's transitioning into a lead position. He just had a baby, like all of that stuff, baby during the pandemic and whatnot. And he recently told me over lunch that he used to define himself by his career wholly. And he said, and I just don't anymore. And it's
Mm.
really weird, really, really weird. And I find myself in that position as well. I spent the last decade or so really defining myself by my accomplishments in my career. And this thing, remember, I wanted to do this like around 12, this thing that I've been, kind of shaping my whole life to do. And now I've got this other little thing that's taking a lot more priority. And I was afraid of that before I had a kid, that would interfere with my career or that would, deprioritize this thing that I had worked so hard to get. Quite the opposite has happened, right? It's made me appreciate my job and my accomplishments more. It's made me stress the importance of finding balance in my life, and it's made
Mm.
me kind of figure out how to prioritize both while still feeling like a functional human. So that's been pretty cool. I don't know if that was the answer you were expecting, but because I think that still is, having kids is challenging in general.
What do you think companies should be doing to support new parents?
One thing that I encountered when I was trying to take my leave is that we had, when I just had the baby, right, is we had a pretty archaic leave policy, and I ended up challenging that at Crystal. I had a conversation with our HR department to say like, hey, I don't know that this is fair. I don't know that this is right for our studio, and I don't know if it's right for me either. And that was actually a really healthy conversation with them that resulted in policy change, and that just kind of brought to my attention, that's something I think that companies could be doing, is taking a look at their leave policies and making sure that they're competitive and reasonable. One
Mm.
thing that I found that was just kind of a repeat thing as I was, pregnant and preparing for having a baby is that it's really hard for someone, even myself, who doesn't have kids to understand what it takes to raise kids,
Mm.
and the time commitment, the life change, like that sort of thing. And those time commitment, like I was saying, the time boxing, right? When Ash is in my life versus at daycare, people don't intuit who don't have kids just how much time that takes. And so I've had to frequently explain, like for example, when we were having the leave discussion with Crystal, I was asked, well, how much time do you think you need? I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, I've never had a child before. I don't know. Like all I have is our recommendations for other people. Like, oh, well, you need X
Yeah.
amount of time, like you need as basically as much time as you can get, because raising a
Mm.
tiny, tiny baby is very, very difficult, and that bonding time, in the beginning is so pivotal to, kind of getting them started on their life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we got really lucky, my partner and I, between California state benefits and the policy change at Crystal, the really healthy, amazing policy change at Crystal, we were able to stagger our leave for the first 9 months of Ash's
Mm.
life. So I think if I were to recommend just one thing for any company in the game industry is, take a look at your parental leave policy and make sure that one, it is equitable to males and females, because like we don't always do that. I don't know how it is over where you're at, but like I've noticed a trend, the old trend, right, was that,
Mm.
like parental leave was 2 weeks, or something like that,
Yeah.
which is just absurd,
Yeah.
where,
Yeah.
and there was a difference between maternity leave and paternity leave. Women would get more time off to recover and things like that, but it still wasn't a ton of time, right? Like I think trying to be more equitable there and offering, equal leave rights to both parents, because like you just don't know which one's going to take point on the kid,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. It's so true.
going back to that question of like, so when are you quitting? It's like, well, I'm not, you know,
That's so awkward. But
yeah.
I can't even believe that was an assumption. I think in the UK, it's like, I don't know, my son's 15 now, so it's like a long time ago. But I remember I had, 2 weeks leave. His mum had 9 months. So and that was just you did that.
It's just what you did. And that's exactly
that's all the dad.
When I was having conversations with Crystal, right, about like, can we look at this? Can we talk about if this is fair and equitable, right? Even my co-developers, right? When I was explaining like, hey, I'm having these conversations with Crystal, the response would be things like that. Like, oh, well, I only got 2 weeks, It's like, well, but like, was that
it's
right?
old. Yeah. I think it's fantastic that Crystal looked at that and were like, yeah, we'll change.
I really want to give them credit for that, actually. Like, they were open to conversation with it. They took the time, to take a magnifying glass to their policy, and they were open to changing it. So that was really cool. Not that I want to, pimp my own company too much, but that's huge, right? Like, if we're talking about what companies can do to change, listening to your employees when they ask those questions and being serious about them is huge.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important that you acknowledge and give credit to those companies, because you want other people to hear this. They might have had a similar conversation with their HR team, right, at their developer they're at, and they might have got the answer that, well, no, it's always been like that, so we're going to keep it like that, or that's the standard in our state, etc. You want people to hear that actually other companies don't do this, because that's often like, the retort you hear is, well, this is what all companies do. Right. Why though? Just because all companies do something wrong doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. Do you know what I mean? I think it's just, you push back at that and you're like, well, I think I'm pretty sure it's in Scandinavia. I think it's Scandinavia, somewhere, a country in Scandinavia. You get like 2 years parental leave.
I know. I heard that and was like, oh my God, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, and then it's no surprise when you hear like, I think it's Norway is the happiest country in the world. You're not shocked. And you're like, well, anyway, I could go really deep on this because it really frustrates me. But I think it's fantastic that Crystal did that. And I think it's brilliant that you're like, you're respecting your time. You're like, you shouldn't work to live or live to work. Like, neither of those should be what it's about. You should
enjoy my job, absolutely. But yeah, having something mandate my work-life balance has been very healthy for me.
Yeah. Anyway, I think a good way of wrapping this up would be to find out what's next for you. What's on the horizon?
So yeah, I can't talk a bunch about what I'm working on right now. Sadly, I'm working on some R&D with Crystal that I'm actually extremely excited for and can't wait until I can talk about. I think that's going to be really great. But yeah, between the lead position, I'm also exploring establishing a technical design department at the studio. I actually did a panel this year at GDC for what is it to be a technical designer, because that's the kind of designer that I identify as. And so that's something that I find that when I kind of explain what that is, and this could be a whole different podcast because I know this is towards the end, I find that a lot of people really identify and go like, oh crap, like that's what I am. That's the name for what I am. That's what I do, So it seems like it's kind of a budding specialization in the industry. And it's something that I'm very excited about exploring, defining better, and getting some recognition for it, Crystal.
I do think that your role, what you do, is fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
I think it's so cool. It just sounds like you just play a lot, basically. Like you create prototypes and you play with them. And but yeah,
it's the dream, right? It's such a fun job.
Yeah. It is the dream. But yeah, I just want to say it's been such a pleasure having you on.
This has been really fun. Thank you so much.
Really good. And I know we got a bit deep at the end. You've got to explore these issues, and it's been incredible hearing like not only your views on like these points, but also just your whole career. It's been really, really cool. But I would like to say obviously the views expressed today are those of Alicia's and my own and do not represent our companies in any way, shape or form. And if you want to reach out to us, you can at thegamedevshow@ptw.com. Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you.
Game over.